So I'm just taking these models for the shocks, saving them as a copy, and then swapping out component by component so I can modify the lengths, because I need to reduce the length of these from the long travel design to this mid travel design and get a 16-inch stroke on each of them. So I'm starting with the coil carrier here, and then I'll drop that into the subassembly and mate it up. So here's what's interesting about pushrod suspension. The shock is mounted upside down. And the reason for that is that thick part of the shock on the bottom is heavier than the thin part. And the whole point of pushrod suspension is to reduce unsprung mass as much as possible. So the way that you do that is you put all of your heavier components on the inboard side of the suspension, and then you put the light components on the outboard side, because the outboard side are going to be unsprung, meaning that they are part of the suspension assembly. So they're bouncing up and down and they're interacting against the spring. And the more you can reduce that unsprung mass, the better the vehicle will behave. So now that shock is in there, I can test the cycling of the suspension. It's looking pretty good. And I can move on to the bypass shock next. Now that bypass shock is in there, again, mounting it upside down, just need to rotate it so that the piggyback reservoir is pointed the right way and drop it into the assembly. So the other question would be, why would you want the bypass shock to be first as opposed to the coil carrier? And the reason is, for the bypass tube tunability, you want it to have as much stroke as possible. And since that front part of the pivot arm will have a longer arc length, that's where you want the bypass shock to be. And then the coil carrier is just supporting the weight, and you can tune that with spring strength. And so that's the reason you make a decision like that for shock configuration. Now just adding some cool anodizing on this one. Black and gold is the theme, and the rear suspension is done.